Starting with problem number 18 here, I've got the absolute value. I've got it already isolated, so right away I can set up my two different problems, my two cases. So those are going to look like n over 4 is less than or equal to 3, and n over 4 is greater than or equal to negative 3. Do not forget to flip your inequality symbol, flip it, and make it a negative. Flip and make it a negative. The next thing I'll do is I'll solve each inequality. So I will multiply each side by 4 to cancel the 4's. And then I can do the same over here. Multiply it times 4. Those will cancel, and that times 4. That leaves me with n is less than or equal to 12, and n is greater than or equal to a negative 12, because I've got a negative 3 times a positive 4. Now from looking at this, I see that it's the absolute value of something is less than a positive number. So if it's less than a positive number, it's going to be an and graph. Less than or equal to, or less than means it's an and. Greater than is going to be great or. It's going to be an or. But this one's an and. So I'll start by plotting my two closed circles because it's less than or equal to. My two closed circles at 12 and negative 12. And I'm looking at this one over here, and it's from the 12, it's pointing to the left, or it's saying n is less than 12. So I know I'm going to need to shade this way. And then I'm looking over here, and it's got n is greater than negative 12, and it's pointing to the right. And I know those values of n that are greater than 12 are this way. So there's your graph. It's an and graph. For problem number 19, before we move on, I know we are going to need to isolate the variable or the absolute value first. We need to isolate this before we can set up our two cases. So I'm going to minus 4 from both sides, and that leaves me with the absolute value of n is less than 8. Now I can set up my two cases. Those are going to look like n is less than 8 and n is greater than negative 8. I know I can then just graph these two, and they're going to be open circles because it is a less than symbol. And I also know from up here it's also going to be an and again because less than and. So at 8 I'm going to do an open circle, and at negative 8 I'm going to do another open circle. If I look down here at this one, I know that I'm going to have to shade from 8 over here to the left. And then I'm looking at n is greater than negative 8 over here, and that's pointing to the right. And I also know n values that are greater than negative 8 are going to be to the right of negative 8, so I'll shade this way. And there's your final solution. And lastly, we have number 20 here. Again, on this one, I'm going to have to isolate my absolute value bar, so I'm going to need to move 3 first. And that's going to look like this. I'll subtract 3 from both sides. And that leaves me with the absolute value of 2n is greater than negative 2. Now, as soon as I see a negative number, I pause and think to myself, is it one of two cases? Is it all reals or no solution? Well, this problem is saying the absolute value of something, so the absolute value of something, this right here, is greater than a negative number. And from class, we know that an absolute value problem, it's always going to be positive. So this is always positive. So anytime a positive number is always greater than a negative number, so our solution becomes all reals. And I shade the entire graph. Now, If it's less than a negative number here, if this were flipped, it would be no solution because a positive number cannot be less than a negative number. That never works. Positive numbers are always greater than negative numbers.